Bien, l'audience est...
The court is back in session.
In their final brief and their closing argument, the prosecution particularly insisted on the alleged reliability of the statements given to them. These statements are extremely unreliable because they were composed by the prosecution themselves. And not only was that done during the investigation, but it was done even after the indictment was finalized. So these are two reasons for them to be unreliable. I'm not going to repeat all the arguments based on which all the prosecution witnesses have been disqualified.
Mi spočitava što sam Tuđmana.
The prosecution accuses me of calling Tudjman the new Ustaša leader for opening or reopening the question of the former genocide against the Serbs, etc. Tudjman was indeed a new leader, but instead of calling him Poglavnik, which would put him on par with Pavelic, he used to call himself Supreme Leader or Vrhovnik. That's the word that never existed in our language before. As for everything else, it was identical. I used words and I fired and pounded them as if I were firing from a howitzer. My great friend Jean-Marie Le Pen used his words in such a lethal manner, which helped him sustain himself on the French political scene for decades, and that provoked animosity against him all over Europe. People who verbally pound their opponents as if they were firing from a howitzer means targeting the core of the problem, to use the destructive power of your thought to destroy the arguments of your opponent, to prove the consistency of your own political program, to prove that you are knowledgeable about everything. All this means firing from a howitzer in a verbal way. And that's what I've been doing here in this courtroom for 9 years. Don't you, as the prosecution, realize how devastated you have become? And I think that the trial chamber is fully aware that you have found yourself in dire straits. I used a howitzer 203 millimeters in my speeches here. And that is why that was so devastating for the tribunal, for my indictment, and for the trial chamber, who is at odds with what they should be doing according to their conscience, and what they must do in compliance and in obedience to their masters. At one point, the prosecution says that in one of my speeches I said that if a division were to take place, the Muslims were entitled to 18% of the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But that's a fact. According to land registry, the Serbs held 74% of land. The reason being that even during the Turkish occupation, the Serb population used to live in villages and countryside, whereas the Muslims lived in towns and cities. They were artisans, they were soldiers, they were traders. Therefore, they didn't have any title deeds on the land. Once this Turkish occupation went away, they even were deprived of that. Even with the abolishment of serfdom, and I hope you know what serfdom is, the Serb peasants were compensated for that, and I think you know that a serf is obliged to give a portion of his earnings to the landowner. And those were the people who were in authority and who had influence. So there was no mistake about that at all. The Muslims held 80% of the land, the Serbs held 74% of the land, and the rest belonged to the Croats. Later on, they say that I used to dub Vukovar the greatest stronghold of Ustasha, and that's the truth. According to the Croatian sources, 1,600 volunteers from all parts of Croatia entered Vukovar in order to fight the JNA troops. So on the one hand, we had highly motivated Croatian fighters nurtured within the Ustasha ideology, and on the other hand we had the JNA, which was half rotten. Vukovar had always been a Serbian town, although some census after the war claimed that there were fewer than 50% of the Serbs. However, one should add to that figure the Serbs who declared themselves as Yugoslavs, as well as those who had to leave Vukovar in the meantime as a result of various pressures.
The prosecution, probably to insult me, says that I was a self-styled soldier who wore a camouflage uniform and a flak jacket. I have never in my life worn a flak jacket, because in that way I also exercised moral influence on my fighters, and I even criticized officers who wore flak jackets if all their troops did not have one. Such an officer cannot have authority among his troops. I never wore a flak jacket. I did wear a uniform, though. I wore a uniform from 1st October, when the state of immediate threat of war was proclaimed, until the withdrawal of the JNA from Bosnia-Herzegovina, that is, the establishment of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. I was, and I thought of myself as a soldier of my homeland, and I'm still a soldier of my homeland. Although I don't wear a uniform, I'm fighting the evil of this Hague Tribunal against the worst Serbian enemies who formed this illegal institution. I am still a soldier of my homeland. But after the creation of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, I never put on a uniform again, and I toured the front lines in civilian clothes, which doesn't mean that I was unarmed. I always had a pistol in my belt.
Tužilaštvo insistira
The prosecution insists on the Serb takeover in municipalities of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the areas of former Croatia.
federalne jedinice.
That is the former Croatian federal unit.
Srbi jesu preuzimali.
Serbs did take over power in all municipalities. They were able to. But the same thing was done by Croats and Muslims. Wherever Muslims were able to take over in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they did. A moment ago I seem to have made a mistake. I remembered later that Muslim general was not Seferović, it was Sefer Halilović. I think I made a mistake there. The one who was acquitted. What did the Muslims do in Zvornik? They completely took over power. Back in 1991, they formed Green Berets. And from the depots of the territorial defense, they armed local criminals. Muslims were the first to take over Zvornik, and then Serbs recaptured it. And in all these towns, it was either Muslims would prevail or Serbs would prevail. You seem to have a problem only with places where Serbs prevailed. Where Muslims prevailed, you find it natural because you believe that the army of Bosnia and Herzegovina is the regular army of Bosnia and Herzegovina, whereas the Serbian army is a paramilitary organization. And that's how you openly proceed in all the trials here. The army of Bosnia and Herzegovina is falsely representing itself. It was an exclusively Muslim army, with the Croat here and there in their ranks. But the Croats had their own army, the army of Herceg-Bosna, of the Croatian Defense Council, as they called it. There was no army that was the army of Bosnia-Herzegovina, although the Muslim army falsely holds itself out to be that. Every ethnic group had its own army. Their officers graduated from the same schools. They graduated from the Yugoslav military academies. Sefer Halilović and Hadži Hasanović and Kubura, all of them, they finished the same military academies as Ratko Mladić and other Serb officers. Only those criminals like Izetbegović at the beginning of the war mobilized people like Juka Prazina and others, but even Izetbegović had to get rid of them in the end. Some were liquidated, some fled. Juka Prazina fled to Belgium and was killed somewhere on the motorway. The Muslim intelligence service caught up with him. He knew too much and he was liquidated. And this Juka Prazina, in the early days of the war, attended sessions of the presidency of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the RUMP presidency. Speaking of the SFRY presidency, you always say RUMP presidency. Why don't you use the same term referring to the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina after the Serb representatives left it, Nikola Koljević and Biljana Plavšić? Why isn't that RUMP? Where is your principled approach?
Kažete da su Šešelj.
You say furthermore that Šešeljevci, Šešelj's men, had a bad name. Had a bad name where? In Croatian and Muslim propaganda? Or is it fama volat? Whatever rumor has. First of all, I am always accompanied by the odium from the former Yugoslavia, from the communist time, as an anti-communist dissident. I was the only one who styled himself as an anti-communist at that time. Other anti-communists never said so openly. They pretended they wanted to adjust socialism and adapt it. I was the only one who said so openly. All the media were under communist control and created a bad public image for me. And when I formed the Chetnik movement, it's not only the Croatian and Muslim media, it was the Serbian media as well. The odium was far worse there, because in the communist times, Chetniks were represented as butchers, as slaughterers, as fascists, whereas they were royalists, and they were not extremists. It was the communists who were extremists. And then when the war broke out, that notoriety spread. However, there's not a single case where Croats or Muslims
nekog dobrovoljca Srpske radikalne
charged a volunteer of the Serbian Radical Party, a so-called Šešeljevac, with war crimes. Not a single case. Our volunteers were often captured by the Croats, mainly when they were wounded, and all of them were exchanged. Not a single one of them was tried. The same goes for the Muslims. Not a single place of worship was destroyed by a volunteer of the Serbian Radical Party. You say that some man called Vranjanac destroyed the Catholic Church in Nevesenje. First of all, you did not prove that he was a radical, nor is anyone able to identify him. And why didn't you put the Roman Catholic Church in Nevesenje in the indictment? What are you doing? It's not in the indictment. If you had really believed that was so, you would have written so. Not a single place of worship was destroyed or damaged by us. Religious buildings were destroyed when the fighting was long over. And who did that? Let that be investigated by the Serb and the Muslim authorities, but let it be investigated on the Croatian side as well. The prosecution is inconsistent in a series of trials. In the Mrkšić et al. Case, the existence of a joint criminal enterprise was not proven. And in my case, there is allegedly a JCE regarding Vukovar. So the commander of the motorized guards brigade and his most prominent officers are not part of the JCE, while I am. I who wasn't there when Vukovar was liberated, I was in Knin. I was in Benkovac during those days. You even have video footage of me in Benkovac.
Dalje,
in the Mrkšić judgment, the charge under Article 5 of the statute concerning a crime against humanity was rejected. The finding was that there was a crime of violation of rules and customs of war under Article 3 of the statute. Mrkšić and others were convicted, or rather charged first, for executing prisoners of war. And what was proven? That 200 POWs were executed, not counting those 7 foreigners. Setting aside that it was proven that the military intelligence service of the JNA made a list of who was to be executed together with Vesna Bosanac. First of all, it was to be 200 people, and that it should be scum. Scum. Riffraff. There is a Turkish term for that, fukara. Poor people, idle people, those bent on petty crime. That kind of people. They made that selection. And Vesna Bosanac helped make that selection. That 200 people, 200 Croats, were to be executed, but that should be, even in the Croatian view, the least possible damage. None of the renowned people were executed, nobody in command position.
Organizovan.
The crime was organized, but you know very well who organized it.
Neprekidno ponavljate laž.
You keep repeating the lie that Vojin Vučković Žuće was a commander of the SRS volunteers in Zvornik. We've heard many statements here, including from Muslims chiefs of police in Zvornik, that Žuće, together with his brother Repić, Miroslav Bogdanović and Milorad Ulemek Legija, arrived by car at Zvornik before the beginning of the conflict, and that the Muslims arrested them at the roadblock. They beat them up. And later, one of those Muslim police chiefs, Mujic, freed them, so that Serbs later helped him get out of Zvornik to Serbia. And now you are trying to prove that Rankić brought them. Rankić was never in Zvornik, and he told you so in his testimony. And you have written proof that Rankić resigned from his membership on the war staff back in 1991, in December 91. That's when you were bargaining and making promises. At that time, you could have gotten statements, any statements you liked. If you had kept your early promises to your witnesses, maybe you would have been more successful. Maybe it would have been more difficult for me to expose that false testimony. However, you disappointed your own witnesses, and you are getting payback. Even when you are bargaining with the worst sort of criminal, you have to keep your promise, otherwise the bargain falls through. But you wanted to be worse criminals than the criminals. And it backfired. You also lied that Arkan's men were the first to come to the Muslim shelter in Zvornik, and then Šešeljevci. That Arkan's men took out the men from there, and Šešeljevci took out women and children, whereas written documents say otherwise. Arkan's men took everyone out of the shelter and then took the men aside and executed them, and chased the women and children away. And then only at the exit from Zvornik, Šešeljevci, that is volunteers of the SRS, received those women and children and tried to help them, provide them with food, etc. Why are you lying that Šešelj's men came into that shelter? Where is that in the evidence? What proof do you have? What statement do you have? You made that lie in the closing argument. You never even tried it during the trial.
Ko vas skupi?
Who gathered you like some sort of riffraff to do this dirty business in the trial? I can't understand. You refer often to Mladić's diary. Mladić notes in one entry that Marko Pavlović or somebody else from Zvornik told him at a meeting at Pale that Šešelj's men and Arkan's men were good. in the fighting in Zvornik. What does that mean? Mladić was not in Bosnia and Herzegovina, first of all, at that time. He was no commander. The army of Republika Srpska did not exist yet. There was only JNA, and our volunteers were integrated into the JNA. Our volunteers were commanded by the commander of the reserve police, Vojislav Jekic. And it's in one of my interviews to Radio Loznica, I mentioned it. You had it admitted into evidence, not I. It's an interview from 93, 94, long before the indictment was brought. Yes, there was a group of about 100 volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party. They had joined the reserve police, and the commander of that reserve police was Vojislav Jekic. Later, when Kula Grad was being taken, all Serb forces were commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Stupar. That's the only truth. All the evidence and the transcript of the trial indicate that.
Nekoliko puta pominjete
You mentioned several times
rokinja 1060
that witness 1062 revoked the statement she had given to the Muslim authorities in 2003. You remember, judges, how miserable she was here in the courtroom when I caught her in this pathetic lie. And it was sad. I was very cautious because she had lost both her husband and her son. I was very cautious indeed. I only did the most necessary examination. And then I pulled out the document and she was taken by surprise. She was not ready for it. The Muslims coached her before the testimony, but she wasn't prepared for that question. And then she said it was not her signature. She didn't write it. Whereas you know perfectly well that it was her signature. You gave me that document because it was your obligation.
Kažete da su
You say that once the town of Zvornik was taken, the volunteer units became members of the police and the territorial defense. That's not true. Where is your proof in evidence? The volunteer unit of the Serbian Radical Party withdrew. A few individuals stayed behind. I know of one who stayed behind. But what did it have to do after the Serbian Radical Party after that? The individual stayed on his own and found a job in the police. A few of our members from Mali Zvornik also found jobs in Veliki Zvornik. Some people from Bogic's group were members of our volunteers from Loznica under the command of Cvetinović. Dragan Cvetinović, also known as Tene, who was later proclaimed a Chetnik Vojvoda. So what could we do if somebody had been our volunteer and then no longer was and joined somebody else? However, the payrolls that you provided me with, that you had seized, showed that after the 26th of April, no single volunteer of the Serbian Radical Party remained in Zvornik and nobody treated them like that. You lie that I moved Žučo and his yellow wasps to Skelani. Žučo was never in Skelani. Why did I insist on the deliberate mistake that the interpreter made with the song? The song has been played several times during this trial, and in the course of my testimony in the trial of Slobodan Milosevic. A group of soldiers is marching, and in the middle of that group there is a man with a Chetnik cap and a Chetnik standard. The soldiers are wearing the so-called olive drab uniforms, which means that they're either reservists or soldiers of the Guards Brigade, or God knows what soldiers. God knows even what part of Vukovar that was, whether it was Sector South or Sector North. Somebody must have staged and edited that. And the soldiers are singing, Slobo, send us lettuce, there will be meat, we will be slaughtering Croats. And your false interpreter interpreted that completely differently. Hey, Croats, we are going to slaughter you. We will slaughter half of you, and the rest we will give to dogs. Both set of words are abhorrent, but the songs are completely different. And now, why did I insist that that was very important and that a distinction had to be made between the two? First of all, the soldiers that were singing Slobo, send us lettuce, they could not be volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party, first of all. And when we look at the uniforms, we see that they couldn't be, because our volunteers had received brand new uniforms from the JNA depots. And what we see in the footage are obsolete uniforms. Second of all, the volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party would never sing a song that laudates Slobo. They wouldn't start something with Slobo. They would sing Šešelj, send us lettuce, or Vojvoda, Šešelj, send us lettuce, if they had sung that at all. Maybe they had sung even more atrocious songs, but you never investigated that. But look at the Croats. Look at what kind of songs the Croats sing even today. Look at their famous singer, Thompson. He is one of the most prominent national singers, but that doesn't really matter. The Serbian volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party had fresh recollection of the times when Milosevic arrested me several times in 1990. I was convicted 3 times, and from Milosevic's prison I put up my candidacy as the future president of the Republic, and I won 100,000 votes based on just one appearance on TV. And most importantly, our volunteers used to sing mocking songs about Milosevic, such as the song Runkovic has resurrected, and now his name is Slobo Milosevic. And then Slobo is hanging in Terazije, and then Slobo, leave your partisans be, because Chetniks are defending your homeland. I have full respect for Milosevic and for what he did for himself and defending his Serbian people before this illegal Hague tribunal. I fully respect his martyr's death. We became sincere friends here during the time that we socialized here. We had never been friends before. But now I'm sharing with you some facts that do not insult Milosevic. Those facts only go to show how your indictment with all of its accompanying documents is based on false documents. You can't go against the facts. The only songs that my volunteers could sing about Milosevic could be mocking songs. They wouldn't be wearing 5-pointed stars on their caps. It's just unimaginable. Another problem for you is Slavko Aleksić. Why didn't you find at least one crime that you could attribute to him? He stated somewhere, and you quoted from that statement, that on the 21st of April 1992, he set foot on the Jewish cemetery and cleansed Grbavica. What does that mean? He actually mobbed Grbavica from the Muslim forces. And when you take a territory, when you occupy territory, you have to mop up the territory in order to empty all the possible pockets of resistance and to liquidate whatever of that resistance remains. Muslims had never been expelled from Grbavica. On several occasions I visited Grbavica. I found myself at stopping too in Grbavica too, when a large group of civilians, a majority of them Muslims, were waiting for bread. Every day the Army of Republika Srpska provided each family with a certain quantity of bread. There were both Serbs and Muslims standing in the same queue. I spent almost an hour there talking to those whom I had known before the war, with whom I had socialized and had been friends with. There were crimes committed in Grbavica as well. But those crimes were committed by criminals, and if any of those criminals were linked to the top echelons of the government, an investigation should reveal that. However, no such criminal was in contact with Slavko Aleksić. You're attacking the fact that Serbs were armed. Serbia was arming them, the JNA was arming them. Who was arming Croats? Who was arming Muslims? Why didn't you charge a prominent German politician, for example, for having sent huge quantities of quantities of weapons from the depots of the former Eastern Germany and delivered them to Croatia? These were weapons of Russian make. Why didn't you charge a Hungarian politician who also delivered weapons to Croats? Or any other such person? You also mentioned the rally that I held in Plitvice Lakes. We went there as civilians. The JNA tried to prevent us from doing that. A large number of roadblocks were set up by the JNA, but I bypassed them all. They had heavy machine guns that were flashing in the spring sun. And when we did everything successfully, we returned to Klin, and Milan Babic commended me before Milan Martic, and Milan Martic donated me a Kalashnikov. The same Kalashnikov that he, on the previous day, had confiscated from a local Croat in Knin. The local Croats in Knin got those Kalashnikovs with ammunition, with flour. I got a Kalashnikov of Hungarian made. It was brand new. What else happened? I was on my way to Belgrade with Alexander Stefanovic. We were driving in the same car. I was driving my own car, my Toyota Corolla, and he was my co-driver. We made a mistake near Doboj, and we turned in the direction of Tuzla. We passed through Tuzla. Every step of the way we could have been stopped by the Muslim police, and we had agreed that if we were to be stopped, we would open fire immediately to sell or hide as dear as possible. A war in Bosnia had not started yet, but we knew what to expect if we were stopped. We were not stopped. We passed through Tuzla and then to Bijeljina, and then we felt safe. I held that automatic rifle under my feet, under my seat in the car. Again, we are talking one-sidedly. Who armed the Serbs? What about Croats and Muslims? Who was the first who started arming themselves? Let's see that. You emphasized the example of Hrtkovci as allegedly a place from which Croats were expelled, or rather deported. We have already seen that not a single Croat left Hrtkovci without previously exchanged their property with somebody else. There were expulsions of Croats from the territory of Serbia, however. When NATO troops entered Kosovo and Metohija, Croats were expelled from Janjevo. They found it unbearable to live under the Albanian authorities. They left all of their property and fled to Croatia. And then Croats settled them in abandoned Croatian apartments and houses. For example, the entire village of Miokovićevo in western Slavonia was settled with Croats who had fled before by Albanians from Janjevo. There's your example for deportation. Why didn't you try anybody for that? The prosecutor also spoke about some aggravating circumstances, and now we come to an area where I'm in complete agreement with the prosecutor. I'm in a complete agreement that there are no mitigating circumstances in this trial. None whatsoever. There are only aggravating circumstances. My behavior, my conduct in the detention and before this trial chamber. That's the first aggravating circumstance that the prosecutor mentions, and I am in complete agreement. I despise this tribunal. I despise the detention unit staff, and I take every opportunity to spite the tribunal, the detention unit, the registry, the prosecutor, everybody here. There's no two ways around it. There's no secret there, I suppose. You see how cooperative I am, how I agree with you. Furthermore, you say that another aggravating circumstance is that I've used this trial as a political sounding board. That's correct, because this is primarily a political court. How do I put up my defense against this tribunal and this prosecutor? Then by staging a political speech, a speech that will be much more clever and wiser than any of your speeches, and that I will use to pound at you, and you will stand no chance in that clash of ideas, the clash of legal arguments, the clash of legal principles. You don't stand a chance against me. All you have, all that remains, is a brute force, and I challenge you, you judges and you prosecutors, to use that brute force to the end. Do not hesitate. You say that I presented a program of Serbian national dominance, and that's correct. You're saying that this is an aggravating circumstances. I agree. Yes, we Serbs are dominant national. What other nation in the world would have survived everything that Serbs have? What other nation in the world would have resisted all of the dark powers and forces that the Serbian people, the small Serbian people, have so successfully resisted? I am approving the Serbian national prevalence in this courtroom also as a prominent Serbian nationalist. I am plucking your feathers, and your feathers are flying sky high. You are not up to my knees. I crush you every step of the way, and nobody can harm me. I am destroying the Hague Tribunal as a whole. I'm publishing the names of protected witnesses on my website. I am challenging you to try me for contempt of court. There are 10 ongoing trials against me, and you can't do me anything because I'm morally and intellectually stronger than you. There is no remedy against me. You can only kill me. And then, even if you do that, my grave will continue to fight against you. You don't even begin to understand what that means, but you will understand. This is like when Americans played a game according to which they had thrown Osama bin Laden into the ocean, but they didn't. They took it back to America to analyze it. When I die, you can't drag me and throw me into an ocean. You will have to return me back to Serbia. And my grave over there will fight against you. The fight goes on. Another aggravating circumstance you mention is the fact that I obstructed the functioning of this tribunal. This tribunal has never functioned normally. In no trial did it function normally, and especially not in mine. What kind of normal functioning of a tribunal is it when somebody's detention lasts for over 9 years, and then you, trial chamber, evoke the jurisprudence of the International Tribunal for Rwanda? However, in Africa, the African Declaration of Human Rights is applied, whereas in Europe, the European Declaration of Human Rights is applied. Let us see if there is a precedent in Europe whether anybody's detention in Europe has lasted so long. You prevented me from presenting my defense case. You have denied me the right that I should enjoy pursuant to Article 21 of the statute. And not to even mention all the other things that you have ill-treated me with. From the first day I appeared before you, the number of them escapes me. There was no need to deny me as a mitigating fact, the fact that I have surrendered myself to the Hague Tribunal. I never surrendered. I traveled to the Hague on the 24th of February for a different reason. At several rallies, I promised the Serbian people that I would implement a project together with the Dutch Queen. That's why I traveled to the Hague. I had no intention whatsoever to surrender myself. When the airplane landed in Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands, and when the funnel was erected, all of a sudden the crew told us that the airport police insisted that I should be the first to step out of the airplane. I thought that a ceremonial guard was waiting for me, that an anthem would be played, something of that sort. When I stepped down from the plane, somewhere at the beginning of the funnel, a few Dutch policemen were waiting for me.
One of them started searching my winter coat that I was holding in my hands, and another tiny person started reading to me an arrest warrant. And when I looked at the door that lead directly from the finger into the airport, I opened it up and I ran out. However, I was surrounded by 100 policemen, and I didn't have a chance. They just dragged me, put me inside a police vehicle, and took me to the DU. Therefore, there was no extenuating circumstances here, and I don't insist on that at all. All I've been doing here is to shatter you completely. and I'm still doing it today. It might take its physical toll on me, but I am enjoying it. I'm having a time of my life. Now, the prosecution is asking for a sentence of 28 years in prison. Of course, there is no legal foundation for any guilty conviction. But you don't need any legal foundation at all. Let us see which kind of sentence would be most appropriate. If you sentence me to 28 years, it is impossible for me to serve it to the end. But if you bear in mind how an energetic opponent I am of the United States of America and their global hegemony and domination, how strong enemy I am of NATO pact, how opposed I am to the EU, and if you bear in mind how much I hate the ICTY, all the ICTY judges and prosecutors, then the only appropriate sentence would be a life sentence. And if you sentence me to life, that would be your only chance to have me serve it to the full. Whatever else you sentence me to, I won't be able to serve it. So, what's the point? This would be the most elegant solution.
Naravno, vi ćete to morat na neki...
Of course, you will have to provide some rationale for that. But what does it matter? We have heard these rationales in other convictions. All these convictions against the Serbs are full of nonsense, full of false statements and lies. Why is it then a problem to do the same in this case as well? You have your professional services who are drafting this. Only it's sometimes difficult to coordinate what different people are writing. There are some convictions of the Serbs for crimes committed against Albania during the NATO bombing. Since the judgment is written in 4 volumes, you have contradicting facts in different volumes because different people wrote this judgment, and those who revised the final version did not spot that difference. They didn't comprehend the problem. However, it's not a problem at all. You can put on paper whatever you want. If you're faced with a dilemma whether you should act in an honorable way and prove yourselves as professional lawyers, or if you should listen to your masters, I think that the most lucrative approach would be to listen to your masters. And that is something that I am really expecting from you. If I die soon, in the near future, and I must tell you this, I forbid any post-mortem to be conducted of my body. A post-mortem can only be conducted in Belgrade provided it is requested by my family, and it should in no way be done at the Military Medical Academy. I need to tell you that as well. There's another thing that I need to do, at least formally, in order to bring more pain to you. At the end of this closing argument, I move for the provisional release. What are the reasons for further detention? There's no possibility for me to flee. Where would I escape? there's no possibility for me to influence any witnesses because all the witnesses have been examined a long time ago, and there's no danger of me re-offending. Why? Because the state of war is no longer in effect in the Balkans. And you have the jurisdiction only over the crimes committed during the civil war. You have no jurisdiction over other crimes. Of course, I am not expecting you to grant my motion. I know that you're going to reject it, but I am putting you in a position in which you have to decide and in which you have to reject my motion. This is the essence of what I'm telling you right now. I am very happy with this trial, although I was deprived by you of many of my rights, and although you prevented me from presenting my defense case, I managed to prove that the ICTY is illegal, that it is anti-Serbian, that it is using lies and the filthiest manipulations, and that it did not contribute in any way whatsoever of the administration of justice, but rather injustice, and that it is a weapon in the hands of totalitarianism and the new global order, which is much worse even than Hitler's Nazi system. So from here on, I will go straight into glory, and the Serbian Radical Party will be triumphant in the forthcoming elections. And my Serbian Radical Party is more important to me than my own life. You did not manage to break it, despite all your efforts. And Maurice Gordon-Montagne and all his friends and associates from Western intelligence services will be disappointed at that, because practically you did nothing except that you helped me, who used to be an ordinary person, to become a personality of importance that will have to be described in every further and future study of the practice of the tribunal. And with this, I would like to conclude. I think I even spared 10 minutes of the time that I was allocated.
Indeed. Does the prosecution, by any chance further to the rules, would like to make or present a rebuttal argument?
Your Honours, as the accused have said himself today, he has been using these proceedings as a public political platform. He has continued his propagandistic claims of historical justifications for his criminal conduct, and he has continued to advocate retaliation against innocent people. He has presented false claims of conspiracies. He has claimed that he has not been given a fair trial. He has attacked the prosecution, the judges, and the tribunal, and he has made numerous assertions which have no basis in the record. None of this bears on his guilt for the charges in the indictment. His closing arguments have raised no legal issues and no factual issues that the prosecution needs to rebut. Your Honours, the prosecution has proven the accused's guilt of the charges in the indictment, and we ask you to enter a verdict of guilty accordingly and impose a sentence that corresponds to the many, many victims that have suffered as a result of the accused's conduct. As for the request for provisional release, Your Honours have repeatedly told the accused that he has to provide state guarantees. He has not done so. He is fully aware of this, and there is simply no point in him making these kind of requests at this point in time on such an unfounded basis. Thank you, Your Honours.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Procureur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prosecutor. Since the accused always has the final word, would you like to add anything?
Slušao sam sve do sada prevod.
I was waiting for the interpretation. Well, I have to add one thing at the end. During this trial, I was greatly handicapped, and I deeply regret that fact. I expected that in this trial, I will be faced by capable prosecutors, that I will oppose some intelligent people and good lawyers, and that we are going to conduct a duel on equal footing. Unfortunately, in this courtroom, I had to face poorly educated people, people who are bad lawyers, and people who entertain no moral scruples. And this is this disadvantage that I felt the whole time, and that has diminished somewhat the value of this trial. It would have been much better if we could have struggled on equal footing. There were 10 or 20 of them who were involved in this trial on the part of the prosecution, but they were no match to me. I sometimes not even notice them here in the courtroom. I undermined and destroyed all their arguments and all their accusations, and they keep blabbering about me being guilty of crimes and other rubbish. So it is really regrettable to see what international justice has boiled down to, and I'm happy that this first attempt to establish international justice after the Nuremberg trials has collapsed, and it is mostly due to the trial that was conducted against me.
Du règlement.
Further to Rule 87 of the rules, I now close the proceedings. We shall withdraw in order to deliberate.
I'm not receiving any interpretation.
Nijednu reč mi nisu preveli.
Not a single word.
I shall repeat. I shall repeat. I said that pursuant to Rule 87 of the rules, I now declare the hearing closed. The trial chamber shall deliberate in private, and once we have deliberated, we shall issue a scheduling order for the verdict.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The hearing stands adjourned.
That